Good morning, everybody. I'm just keeping an eye on how many participants we've got so I can make sure I can see you all on the same screen. As Juliet has said, we really want this to be more of a discussion. In my presentation, I hope you've all watched it. I raised some issues. So rather than me go over them, where does somebody want to start? My idea is that we'll take one topic at a time. So if somebody starts a topic and you want to talk about something else, be patient, come in on that topic first, and then after that, we'll change the subject. So would somebody like to raise a hand electronically if you'd like to start the discussion going, and I'll look for whoever sticks their hands up, and you can unmute yourself when I call your name. No? Come on, somebody must have a question. All right. Nobody yet?
Maybe they need a prompt. Maybe you should
Maybe
throw something out there and see what happens.
I was hoping the video and some of this right. Yeah. Okay. Let's go this way then. We've had quite a lively discussion in the community about what I called civic education, which isn't teaching people about politics and how our society works, but it's the notion that, as was put in Elizabeth Bartholet's regurgitated article from the States, that every child has a right to a compulsory state education that is not just to be taught by the state, but to be taught what the state wants them to learn. And I suspect that agenda is what's lying behind a lot of the pressure on to register home education and so on. So let's start. Who wants to say if they'd heard of that before, or something like that? So stick a hand up or something, and if you don't want to do that, type on the chat, and I'll call you in if you do it that way. But let's have some input, please. Civic education.
Well, actually, Randall, I was thinking what perhaps you could talk about some of the issues that we're noticing that are anti-family, you know, in terms of what say parents have over how their children are educated. Some of the things we're finding that are coming up in just politically that are anti-family.
Yeah. On that front, we're looking wider than home education, really. I think the big place where it's happening in schools is over the relationship and sex education agenda. And in that place, we're seeing more and more parents expressing concerns that their children are being taught different from their religious or philosophical convictions, and it's being made mandatory. In Britain anyway, we've had a situation where when it came to sex education, that has always been a parent's right to withdraw a child. Now that right for sex education hasn't been taken away till a child gets to the last 1 or 2 years of secondary school, but what they have done is separate out relationship education from sex education, which is what's opened the door to what I'll term modern sexual ethics, for them to be taught in primary schools to children when it isn't the values of their parents. And this has been brought about by a very hard work of lobbying. So we are seeing that whilst in home education, we're more aware of the threat to parental responsibility. I see beginning to be realised in schools that there is another threat to parental responsibility in that area. And that is the key one at the moment that you'll find a lot of other people talking about. Interestingly, the lead group pushing back against that has come from the Muslim community. They've been organising protests. So that's the area there. Have you heard of the protests that have been going on in Birmingham over that? Yeah, one or two people nodding. Nobody wanted to say anything that I can see. I've got one question. Right, Kate, unmute yourself and ask it. Katie, unmute yourself and ask it, please.
Okay, I was wondering, is this something that you see a difference in depending on, who's in charge in the primary government, which is mostly either Labour or Conservative? Or is it just something that's underlying coming from the civil servant, and whoever's in power, you're still seeing the push more towards state control against parental control, or does that change?
It hasn't changed recently. A couple of years ago, I was talking to somebody who's involved in the Conservative Party at a Westminster level. He's not an MP, but he's an assistant to MPs. And he reckoned that there was only, at that time, a dozen maybe truly Conservative MPs in Parliament. There was many political ones who would label themselves as Conservative, but particularly in areas like this, they were actually Liberal or Socialist. And I think if you look at it, this agenda has been pushed originally under Ed Ball's Children's School and Families department, but now it's been carried over into the Conservative-led Department of Education, and they are very pro pushing a moral agenda through schools. So my personal feeling is that it's unlikely to change from that end. The lobbyists who say quite strongly, we want you to teach our views to all children. You can see that with the British Humanist Organisation. I'm in correspondence with somebody who resigned from Humanist UK, saying they had a valid remit to lobby against state-funded schools teaching religion, but she became concerned when they started lobbying against parents not being able to home educate their children from a religious position, because that was outside of their remit, and I can see that. But Humanist UK very definitely have been lobbying behind the scenes on that front, and other groups have been lobbying on the areas of gender and sexual identity. So I suspect all parties are being pushed there. It's also interesting that when Mike Wood, Mike Wood of Education UK, after the Liberal Democrats adopted a policy for the whole of the United Kingdom that monitoring, registration and regular monitoring of home education should become a policy across the United Kingdom, Mike Wood went to a meeting at the House of Lords with members of the Liberal Democrat Party, and also at the meeting was a representative of Humanist UK. So they are very strongly a lobby group there, and that is a cross-party lobby group. So it isn't just one party that's doing this. I see it much more as a as a mindset that's got across the different parties. So you look what's happening in the UK. We've got a Conservative government in England. They are doing their best at the moment to resist the pressure. They're not being as good, and I think they could be a lot better. But in Wales, you've got a Labour First Minister and a Liberal Democrat Education Minister pressing for these things. In Scotland, you've got the SNP pressing for an alternative to the named person scheme, which again is a scheme that takes parental rights away. So I think it's a broad thing. Anybody want to come in on that? Anybody got any experience from elsewhere? I really want this to be a two-way conversation.
I just wanted to add that in some cases, the sort of secular humanist proponents, they kind of assume there's some kind of a place where you have no, like you're free of values, free of, values or ideology, but there's actually no such thing as an ideological vacuum or religious vacuum. Pretty much everybody has a belief system or an ideology which they're passing on, even if when they think they don't. And so it's you can't let your guard down and think, oh well, this is just it doesn't impose a value. It will always impose a value on you.
Yeah, right. Catherine Norman's raised her hand. Come on in, Catherine.
Yeah, well, I'm a humanist home educator.
Right.
On the premise that actually it is it's the only form of education that can actually be humanist, because it's the only one that encourages that looks at human agency and ability to learn and think.
Right.
So I don't believe you can get a humanist education in a school because it's too adult directed, and it doesn't take into account how people learn and community and all those fundamental aspects of being humanist. So it's really hard, and probably the majority of home educators I know would put themselves in the secular humanist band. No, lots of religious home educators, but a large percentage are humanist and do it because of those underlying humanist values.
Right, yeah.
But quite how you explain that to Humanists UK, when they're not really looking at education and going, children are human, families are human, communities are human. These are the things that underlie humanism and humanist education philosophy are those that underlying home education.
Right.
And so it's really hard to see why they don't think the humanist agency aspect applies to children and families when state control is not a humanist fundamental value.
Yeah. I mean, that is a real valid point. I think this is what my other contact that I'd mentioned was puzzling over. And it was conversation with that lady that took me, she's the person who unearthed the quote by Amanda Spielman about civic education and the purpose of education being to prepare children that in the mold that the church that the state wants them in. And I suspect, but I'd love for people who are nearer their ideological view to press Humanists UK on on what grounds do they think they can interfere with family life in order to force an agenda on people that they haven't convinced them of?
Yeah.
Our society works on being able to debate and convince, but it feels to me that what we've got in education, not just home education, we're just the outriders. We're the harder group to corral, but in education there is a real desire to force a worldview on the next generation of children. You wanted to come back in, Catherine?
Yeah, and because if you look up about the kind of principle of humanist education, it is like a home education tick box.
Right.
And you look at it and you think, well, how can you go from that when school quite definitely doesn't meet any of those? And, you know, have this whole discussion about humanist education and how could you get it and whatever. But school is just one of the hardest places to do that. And it's just like a home education tick box.
Right.
About how you persuade people that's the case.
Yeah. I mean, one of the issues I think Humanists UK have got, have you noticed how the word homeschooling has been imported into the British culture over the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly now with the COVID-19 situation? A lot of I suspect their thinking on home education comes from the thinking that used to be the case in the USA. The majority of home educators in the USA used to be religious, mainly evangelical Christian. But in recent years that changed. One of the reasons I've been told is because parents are too afraid to send their children to schools because of the mass murders with gun crime and so on. And more parents are waking up, not just to that, but to the violence thing. And one of the recent bits of data I've picked up from the arguments around the Harvard magazine was the fact that now 75% of home educators in the USA do not class themselves to be religious. And the person who made that point, and I can find the article if anybody wants it, pointed out that's exactly the same proportion in the USA of the population that describes themselves as non-religious. So in the States, we've seen this move from home education being mainly religious to being a cross-section of society. And I wonder if groups like Humanists UK still see home education as the preserve of religious parents, and therefore, like they've been going at the Jewish Orthodox schools and trying to get them closed down, even though they're private institutions, they want to close down home education because they're labelling it as a religious activity. And if that's right, I would encourage those of you who are humanist home educators to really get onto them and tell them they are damaging your freedoms. Does that sound unreasonable?
No, yeah, thank you.
Fine. Right. Who else would like to come in, please? Change of subject or something? Yeah. Ione, are you waving? Yeah, would you like, I'll unmute you. I think I can. Okay, Ione.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. It was very hard to know how to vote when I suppose it was my first time to be allowed to vote. I'm now British, but I'm actually originally Romanian. And it's hard to know how to vote and how to be Christian and political without,
right.
In a fair way, not just picking certain pet issues, just sort of, yeah. And it would be good to know how to uphold Christian values across political agendas, because I have good friends who are Christian and feminist, they describe themselves, and people who are Christian in the same church with that friend, very good friends with them, who are anti-feminist. But I guess there's certain Christian values, and it would be good to be able to talk about family values, freedoms, home education, without falling out with each other, and also falling into opposed camps. Just, yeah, be able to call wrong, whether it's in that party or the other. It just so happens in York we have Labour MP who is a Christian. She's not from my church or anything, but I know people who know her, and she's lovely. But yeah, I know that the Labour Party plans to ditch home education, or to so cripple it with, you know, monitoring, that it's not worth your, yeah, your sanity. Right. I'm so pleased that in UK we don't have a body that really struggles your freedom with standards. And you know, in the US it's a different beast, and I'm not sure I'd want to have that burden of having to comply with state interference. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Right, thank you very much. I'll reflect that and just widen it out. One of the skills I think we've got to learn in the home educating community, which comes down to your question about a church, because most what we call churches are actually, like a political party, a coalition of people with very different views. And part of the issues with being in a group like that is the difficulty of knowing how to share and discuss your different views to build one another up, rather than to end up strangling people, to put it bluntly. Now, I want to give you an interesting model, because as you look at the home educating community, we are increasingly a very wide coalition. I exchanged letters with Lord Soley when his bill was going through Parliament. And it was never going to get through, but it did stir up a lot of what's been going on now. And he wrote back to me and he said, why can't you home educators form a union, he didn't use the word union, form a group that we can negotiate with? And my response to Lord Soley was very simply, we're not employed by anybody, we don't need a trade union. And I think that's very true. But at the same time, we need to know how to cover one another's backs. So those who are Muslims, say, need to be able to stand with the Christians and with the humanists in this matter. Is there a way to do that? Well, National Secular Society has in the past worked with the Christian Institute on freedom of speech issues. Two very unlikely partners. And certainly within the home educating community, we need to be able to know how to relate to one another across our philosophical, religious differences to see what values we share. Now, churches are like that. There's lots of churches with different issues, see things differently, but they do need to learn how to communicate without saying, I won't work with you unless you agree with me on this. And another dynamic we have that's really difficult in human society, therefore it's difficult in home education circles, is, I put it like this: to be a home educator, you need to be somebody who is willing to, certainly in the pioneer days when we got involved, stick out like a sore thumb. You need to be a pioneer. You need to go against the flow of things. It's a bit easier these days, but you still need something of that. Now, if you get a lot of mavericks, which is a nice word for home educators, who are pioneers in something, they're great at being that lone wolf who goes out front and sets the pace. What they're very bad at is them coming within a group and saying, how can we encourage one another without making you all do it my way? And we've struggled with that. You know, there is one national home educating group that if you believe, if it's your conviction that physical disciplining children with a smack is acceptable, they don't want to work with you. I'm not saying which group it is, but if you look on the websites, you'll find it. They don't want to work with you if you don't hold that view. Well, is that necessary? Can you say, could they not say to others, we don't like that view, but we think protecting our parental freedoms to smack or not to smack is more important than trying to that. So we have to grow and find a way of encouraging one another without pulling ourselves into an over-organized group where our variety, we've got to value our variety, in my opinion, while encouraging wisdom and research and further understanding of what lies behind what has been called a hostile environment towards home education. So that's winded it out a little bit from what Iona said. And you know, but I think it does that. Okay, I've got a question coming from. How about it, Randall? No, I am not running any political party. I do enough already. I think we things. Ruth Barber, do you want to comment on what you've typed? Unmute yourself. You're not unmuted. Right, I can hear you now.
I just think it's a very valid point, Randall, that we're so fragmented in this country. But we need a big voice somehow. A big voice where everybody can get behind and say, yes, on this issue, you know, we're agreed. And it's challenging these, you know, the high level, the government decisions, the policies to do with education, all that you've been talking about. Somehow we need to find a big voice. And that means putting aside some of your differences in order to find a collective shout. So I think that's very valid. I don't know how you do it, mind.
I think what we've got to agree is what values are the main values that we're trying to protect.
Yeah, to uphold. Yeah.
And you've got to dig down and really get those values, which are our common ground.
Yeah. Do you think that that needs to be done kind of issue by issue? So kind of when there's like a push for, well, like registration, would there be a way of kind of gathering organisations who subscribe to, you know, whatever values for a particular purpose? I mean, I don't know how you go about it, but I don't think we've made it that I can see anyway in any cohesive way.
Well,
do you want to respond to that?
If you look back at the history of home education in this country, there was strong characters in the past when education otherwise was the only group in the country. There was some strong characters in there, but they didn't find a way to say, where do we work together? They ended up, as far as I can see, there's some very hurt people come out of that, who are now just doing their own thing without being part of an organisation. And from my own personal conviction, the best way to do something like that is to gather the strong characters, but not make them an organisation. It's to value them as visionaries and pioneers and say, will you do something, where's your thinking at? What do you think these are? And have a good airing, but without somebody saying the way to do it is my way. To inspire rather than to control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think to me what you're saying is there needs to be some humility, and obviously that is a particular value that some of us would subscribe to more than others, shall we say?
Yeah.
So it's how you do that, isn't it? So
yeah.
I don't know whether you can get kind of some kind of talks going with kind of leaders in certain organisations with a view to kind of finding agreement when it's necessary for a purpose, to make a statement about this, and we'll put our names behind that. I mean, I just think there's got to be a way of doing it, because we need it. 5 years down the line, I think we're going to need something where we've actually got a big voice, because it's just becoming more and more of an issue, and I think we've got to get our troops organised. Like I say, I don't know how you do it, but I just see 5 years down the line, we need something where we've got we can make a shout. But
just a quick response then. There's a couple of people, one who's sent a message on the thing and one who's got a hand raised, so I'll come to you two in a minute. Just to say, I think at the moment with the pandemic, we really have to wait and see a little bit longer as to what happens. Kate, no, Louise Engels, would you like to come in, please? Do you want to mute yourself? Yeah?
Yes.
Right, Louise.
Hello. Well, I don't know if you know, but I run an organisation called Not Fine in School. Children who are school refusers, children who struggle with special needs and whatever. And we've been forming some alliances with various people. But one thing I've noticed in the pandemic has definitely helped is that parental rights generally have been eroded over the last, I don't know, decade or so. So we've had a lot of parents who've had prosecutions for not attending when their children are too ill to attend, forced attendance. And I'm part of a group called the Parents Union. And they started with John Platt, the man who took his child on holiday. I got to know him actually, and there were genuine reasons for that holiday which he hasn't shared publicly. And really it is to do with rights, and I think we've got more in common with people than maybe we think as home educators, because obviously I'm sort of in both camps because I have a child at school and a child who's home educated. But I think parents, the pandemic has really highlighted, we had parents being threatened with prosecution days before the schools closed because they didn't feel they could send their children to school because of health conditions. And we've managed to I believe we've managed to influence the government in that now. We did some research and showed that parents want to be able to make their own choices about whether to send children into school. And the government announced shortly after that there'll be no prosecutions or penalties for parents who choose not to send their children in when their schools are open. So I think there is a wider issue that we can tap into, and if we are part of the debate with the special educational needs families, with the parents who want to take their children on holiday. I mean, I don't know if you all realise, parents are not even allowed to take their children to a grandparent's funeral unless a head teacher approves. That's how ridiculous it is that parents have been in chemo who have been very, very ill and are thinking that the family's been through the biggest stress of their lives and they want to go on a week's holiday that maybe a charity's funded, that their family needs to heal. They can be prosecuted for going. So I think the fact that we are making, on a parent's wedding, the fact that we are, we're choosing what's right for our children. And I think as parents in the whole country, we need to reclaim that right. And there are alliances that can be made just on those grounds, that parents have a right to choose what's right for their own children's and families' health and well-being. And home education is a huge part of that. You know, with my not finding school children, if we hadn't been allowed to deregister, many of our children wouldn't be here today. Because as I call myself the reluctant home educator, not really, but you know, that's what I did my talk about. And if I hadn't had that choice, one of my children would not be here, because the pressures from the system was so harsh that he couldn't even contemplate living. And that's something that we can pull together. Like if the home education community can back the parents who want that right to choose when their children don't attend school for their own reasons and for good reasons, and the special education parents, we can unite, because what we are is parents, aren't we?
Yeah. Can I come in there? Because I do think this is a valid point. I then encourage home educators to pick it up, really, that we have an opportunity here, and with the RSE thing, to get in touch with parents who just prior to this, their only framework was school, to press this parental rights, or you've got to be careful with that, parental responsibilities, actually. I understand you can't prosecute, if you send your child to a school and it doesn't provide a suitable education, you can't prosecute the school, right? You just can't. No, you can't do that. You just can't prosecute a school because it's your responsibility. And so, it is an opportunity to work on encouraging the parents in your street, in your family circles, to think about what their responsibilities as parents are.
My children, one of my children was abused within a school by a head teacher, neglected. Social services have agreed that. She's just had her recent Ofsted report saying that she's good school. You know, my local authority, the Department for Education, my MP, everybody knows and has seen the legal documents, even the Ombudsman agreed, and she's still there running her school. And I find it absolutely shocking that Anne Longfield, for example, is completely feeling that any child who isn't in school is at risk of abuse. You know, children with autism who are in an unsuitable environment with too many, you know, I mean, some of them in these academies are being put in isolation for not making eye contact with the head teacher. Yeah. They can't make eye contact. You know, children with ADHD for fidgeting. Children, yeah. My son was put in detention for not writing enough, and he's in the 0.1 percentile for writing as a dyslexic. And these are really harmful situations, and that's why I think, you know, we can unite together as parents.
Yeah. Can I just ask you a question on that, Louise? Do you know of anybody who's done any work to document the amount of abuse in schools that goes on?
We've got a report, I'll have to send it to you, that we wrote following the dispatches programme. Right. Our own skipping school report, and we interviewed a large number of parents as to why, for example, they weren't home educating. And I think in our group, 92% of our parents who have children who are school refusers, 92% of those children have special educational needs that aren't being met. So, right. Behold, many of them.
I was actually told, you talked about when your children being abused.
Yeah, but that
one of the things I've picked up from the American, one of the things I've picked up from the American interchange in the last few weeks is they've actually got documented evidence over there of how many children have been physically or sexually abused by school staff.
Oh yeah,
and it's shockingly high.
Yeah.
And when you compare it to what happens,
you know.
Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, for my son's head teacher didn't believe the diagnosis of a consultant rheumatologist, and a dyslexia assessor, a qualified dyslexia assessor, she didn't agree with it. So as a parent, if I didn't agree with a diagnosis and I refused treatment of my children for a medical condition, that would be neglect and I would risk losing my children. She's able to continue teaching. It's those kinds of neglects that we were quite interested in, because, you know, if I was forcing my autistic child to look into my face every single day and punishing them for being autistic, I would quite rightly I'd have an intervention from social services. And it's those kind of abuses that we document, you know, which is that kind of thing. But obviously head teachers are respected by the community, so there's a lot more parent blaming. And I actually then got accused of fabricating and inducing illness, and 18% of our parents have been accused of that, which is Munchausen's by proxy, which is nigh on, you know, it's such a small proportion, if any, and there's no implications for those head teachers who do that. So that's the kind of abuse I was thinking. But yeah, the sexual and physical abuse, but also for my son, he's diagnosed with school trauma based, and the report says it was on bullying and being made to feel responsible for the bullying and how he was treated by adults within the school. And there's no accountability for that, because even the ombudsman who's seen that, you know, there's almost nothing you can do. So it's frightening then to me that abuse of home educated children is used as such a, you know, weapon against us. Yeah. when so much harm, like I say, you know, a lot of people are home educating now as a last resort, not as a choice, but because there was no other choice to protect their children, and we've got to keep that as an option.
Yeah. Okay, I want to move it on because I've had a message here from Alison Stewart. Do you want to raise your point, Alison? I'll unmute you if that's easier. Let me unmute you. Right, there you are, because I think this is an important step on. So, can't hear you. I'll have to read it if you can't hear you. Right, speak, Alison. No, Alison says, I agree with you that it's important to use parental responsibility rather than parental rights. It's so easy for those opposing us to come in with, but what about children's rights? What do we understand as children's rights? And so on. And how do we answer that question? Has anybody got any thoughts on that? Because it is a major issue. It's what was put forward in Wales. It's all about children's rights. It's what's being put forward in other places, the rights of children. Has anybody?
I think the children's rights issue is one of the things that the ideologues like Anne Longfield and Amanda Spielman are really strong on. It drives their agenda as well as the anti-family thing.
Not to forget Sally Holland in Wales.
If I can hop in there, I see Louise has said, you know, it's not just about children's rights, it's about human rights. And Peter Gray's article where he points out that forcing children into school is actually, you know, there's an irony to saying that a child has a right to, you know, to education, and then forcing them into an education that actually might not even be working for them.
Yeah. I'll just show you that one of the quotes from there in a second. Have you read Peter's article? I don't know. Just let me find it. It's coming up in a minute. It's just a bit slow with the lead. Let me go back to the other bits for now.
It's called the case against homeschoolers.
Yeah, it's just I'm waiting for it to load, Juliet. Things are a bit.
Okay, I'm allowing screen sharing.
Yeah, that's fine. Here we are. We've got it. Right. No, that's not the one I was looking for. Sorry. Let's go back. That's the one. But we need to understand what arguments the people who say this is a child's right, because there is actually some documents lie behind the human rights things that I came across a while back, but I haven't really had the time to look at. They're, I forget the proper name for them. I'll try and dig it out for this evening's session. But they're interpretations of the UNCR and so on, and how they should be applied. And when I read the relevant one, it seemed to say they were to me, they felt like they were turning it all on the head. And that was right. This is Peter's article. I'll just show you one quote from it. Here we are. Yep. Can you see that web page, folks? It's coming up. Yeah, I need to get it up now because it's hiding. Right. Please move this window. Right. Okay. There we are. Yeah, Mary will read it to the top paragraph there.
Barthollet, with no hint of irony, contends that children have the right to government-enforced compulsory schooling. Think about that for a moment. A right that they can't refuse. A perfect example of Orwellian doublespeak, if ever there was one. Somehow, according to Barthollet's logic, a state that forces children to attend the state schools is respecting children's rights. But a family that offers their child the option of homeschooling is not.
So we're coming back on screen. So that is the twisted arguments that behind children's rights. I think that for me in this country has been mostly seen with Sally Holland's and Kirsty Williams' arguments for the introduction of a register in Wales, which now, in case you haven't picked it up, it was announced in the context of home education, a database of all children in Wales. It was announced in that context, but it's really now going to be applied to every child. So any child who goes to a hospital or to a doctor's, the NHS employee has a responsibility to, or will have, if it goes through, a responsibility to report that child's details, including the name and address of anybody who looks after them at any time, to the local authority, to the relevant local authority. And that's the big area. So this whole area of human rights is quite important, really. So that's an area. So yeah, that's the type of area we need to be thinking about. I'm just missed one or two notes, so I'm trying to pick them up. Anybody want to come in with anything? Let me have a look.
Rachel Retallick said a few questions back. What about the people who helped when it was the Badman problems back in 2009, 2010? I think some of them are still around, but some of them, their children have now got older, and as parents, they've moved on to whatever else they're going to do with their lives. So there's a kind of natural wastage that some parents are interested in the issues for as long as their children are in home education, and then instead of staying around and, you know, continuing to contribute when they've maybe got a bit more time, the baton goes to the next generation. Although there may still be some very knowledgeable and willing people out there that we just haven't encountered, or maybe I don't know about and you do.
Yeah. Catherine Norman's one of the people like us, she says, who was around at the Badman times.
Oh, very good.
It's nice to see some people, but some people have moved on and don't have the time now, don't have the motivation. One of the things that I think saddens me is that people of our generation, our children are all adults, have moved on rather than actually seeing this was something which was of value, not just for us, but for future generations, and are willing to take that role on. So, you know, that's been a bit of a sad thing, but I'm pressing on with it. I'm still, yeah. Liz Jenkins, do you want to comment on the ed-free thing?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah.
So I've been part of ed-free since it started back in 2013. We started because when I first looked into home education, well over 10 years ago now, at the time, the only information I could find online was Education Otherwise, and I had to pay to become a member just to find out basic information. And at this point, I wasn't decided I was going to home educate. So I wanted to be able to find the education for free rather than have to pay for it. So the idea behind educational freedom was that all the information would be there for free for anybody, and we wouldn't charge for it. So the educational freedom is just an information website. We do respond to emails, we do respond to messages through Facebook, but essentially we're just there so everybody has the ability to get the available information. Yet, because there are some strong personalities within the home education world, including some who have been involved with educational freedom either for a short time or a long time, even though we're now, 7 years on from when we started, people still hold up things that we claim to speak for all home educators, when in fact, when I've got involved with like the government's, I can't think what the word is, consultation last year, I've always done so from a personal point of view, even though I'm part of educational freedom, because as soon as I say I'm part of educational freedom, people go, oh, no, they do this, that, and the other. And so many different groups, I'd happily work with either EO or HEUK or anybody else. A lot of people don't want to work with us, even if we want to sing from the same song sheet so that our voice is heard louder. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Juliet, do you want to make your point about EO?
Yeah. Yes, well, so Education Otherwise, who were actually in the strongest position years ago to take things forward, they became a charity, and I think part of that is they're not allowed to like lobby, so they can't really get involved politically, which has hamstrung them basically, and they've lost their clout and they've lost their way to a large extent. So I am a member of Education Otherwise, but it's not what it could have been, and we are our own biggest enemy, because we don't, we need to be able to work together. And what happens is you just end up having more and more new organizations being set up instead of one cohesive one. And I think I would dearly, I was actually thinking of this some time ago, but before pandemic and whatever, is of actually organizing like a, you could call it a powwow, but basically an opportunity for anyone who felt that they wanted to be part of something from around the country to come together and actually look at what we've, forming something. And I think we have to carry on regardless of the negative voices, because we can't, we are so fragmented. And in South Africa, there was a different scenario. So we had home education was much more cohesive, and people worked together better, and they had something called the Pestalozzi Trust. And the Pestalozzi Trust, you would sign up as a member and you would pay a fee for the year, but for that fee, if you had a problem with a local authority or going to court, they would pay that for you. You'd have your costs covered. So there was that, and if somebody was on your doorstep giving you a hard time, you could phone them and hand the phone to the person on your doorstep, and they would tell them off and read them the Riot Act. And so they had your back, and you knew they had your back. Part of that was also the community and being in a loop and getting the news and that kind of thing. And there were no other organizations that did that. There was the one. And because of that, they could speak to government. They could go in and challenge because they had the numbers behind them. Now, in this country, I mean, I honestly despair, because every time I try and think about how we do it, like Liz says, you know, you just kind of like, it just seems impossible. And some people say our strength is in the fact that we're so many voices that they don't know what to do with us. And I suppose that's true, but we need to find a broader umbrella. The one thing we all have in common is that we believe that parents should have the right to home educate. Nothing else should matter, really. It needs to be under that banner, whatever your religious background or your ideological background or your educational philosophy, any of those things should actually be secondary. So I don't know. I don't know whether we try and create a session after this with those who actually are genuinely interested in moving forward with something and see what we can birth out of this.
Well, yeah.
These people here.
Think about that. Julie Spriggles just typed a clarification on the charity thing. Julie, if you want to comment, please unmute yourself. If not, I'll do it. I'll read what you said. No muting that. Julie basically says EO was always a charity, but the charity law changed, and they're not allowed. They're not allowed to carry out. Charities are no longer allowed to carry out anything that may be considered a political activity. So that's the big change. Where I want to come in is back to Liz Jenkins' point, really, and to take on Juliet's. My feeling is if you try and bring about some unity between organisations, that will fail. What more is likely to work is if you can bring around some communication between the key individuals in the different organizations. If you do it on an organizational basis, people have got to say, I've got to go back to my trustees, I've got to go back to the other people. But if you find the key people, and yeah, you know, that's not too hard to do. There are key people, some are not involved in organisations, others who are, and we can get talking. And let's use this opportunity, not of Learn Free, but of us all getting used to having meetings remotely. It saves a lot of time. I don't really like it, but it is a good tool while it's there, while it's available. So what I would like to suggest to the people in this, and I'll talk to Juliet about it for now, later on, but can people message me on the app and just say, please get in, please can we be, you know, talk, and I'll try and come back to you. I've got a busy agenda because I'm opting out to Learn Free this afternoon to go to something else on the Zoom, where I'm leading a group, and then I'm coming back here in the evening. So it may be tomorrow before I get back to you, but I will try and get back to you and suggest at least where we can begin to talk about it and how we can invite other people in to a wider discussion. So if you're involved, you feel you're involved at the lead of something, whether it's Louise's group or Liz's group or Juliet with Learn Free, and you want to start this conversation, send me a message on the app and we'll do it that way. Mary's point is something else.
Just move it up a bit, because we had a comment from Catherine Norman, just putting the other
there,
the rider to that, no, the one above there.
The one above.
This one.
Right.
Yeah. The risks of a strong single organisation is that it can result in organisations such as HSLDA, which is the American Christian one, which isn't open to all beliefs, has considerable influence, and whose negotiations with state government have been blamed for loss of freedoms to home educate. And then later on she says, and the whole community becomes vulnerable if the organisation encounters problems or becomes seen as suspect. So that's like the other view.
Yeah.
And Katie said something as well. Just come down a bit on the screen. Katie said yes, but there will still be those alternative voices here, I think, just as well.
On that one, I think we should have the alternative voices. I think the variety is one of our strengths. I'm not looking for a united voice. What I'm looking for is cross inspiration, and perhaps a ability to help one another focus on what the real issues are. I feel, having been one of the people that was mentioned earlier on the Badman, we first got involved in the political side of home education in 2009 in response to Badman. Is then the great thing was that people found out what they could do and got on with it. They didn't go back to a committee and say, can we do this? They just got on with it. And in that sense, that was fine. But I feel that since 2017, when it was boiling up before then, but slowly took the lid off the pan and let it overflow, a lot of the home educating community have not been aware what the issues are. And so that's it. That's what I'm thinking. Juliet, how are we doing for time? It's 5.
Yeah, it is past 12, but as I said, we don't have any other sessions till 1. So if you, it's really up to you. I just wanted to add that I think maybe what we need to consider is some kind of a, I don't know if the word is like a confederation, but where you maybe would bring representatives from all the different groups together to kind of be united on the issue rather than being united as an organization. I don't know. I think these are things we need to think about and we need to talk about, and we need to move forward positively instead of constantly listing all the obstacles to being united.
Yeah, I think unite is perhaps too strong a word because people mean different things by that. That's when you start getting people saying, well, you've all got to agree to my agenda. I think what we are needing more as a wider home education community is a sense of talking to one another, learning from one another and inspiring one another. I think that's the careful thing. That a lot of people take unity to mean uniformity, and it isn't that. It isn't. The two aren't the same. But I learned a long time ago that we need to clarify what we mean by words, because whatever I mean by words, I can almost guarantee that everyone listening to me will have a different meaning of that word, and therefore, that's what we need. So we don't need uniformity. We need cross-fertilization. We need communication. We need to help one another understand what's going on. And we need a forum where people can put forward the ideas and then be respectfully but critically looked at and said, are you sure about that? Because in such a mature process, if you've got adults then working on this, then you come out with mature ideas. It's the immature who end up forcing their views on other people. Yeah? Anybody want to come on that? I'm trying to talk, read a chat list,
Randall, I just added, my comment was basically is that I think it's more about all our voices talking together so that we are louder, and we don't have to be all saying exactly the same thing, but just be loud enough that the government takes notice and heeds, heeds that voice.
Yeah.
There may be another component in all this as well, that when the schools go back, or when the government say children have to go back into school, there may still be parents who decide they're not sending their children back in, and that will raise its own issues in June and even in September. So there may be new factors as a result of the pandemic situation which highlight the parents' rights issue. That we need to sort of be watching those and just keep monitoring what is going on, because everything is in such a state of flux at the moment.
Well,
the whole educational world having a sort of rethink and re-evaluate about itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it does go to the bigger issue of parental responsibility rather than just home education. So there is a bigger a thing there. I see Iona has raised her hand.
Yeah.
I was going to say one tool that maybe we can have in common is research. You're sort of discovering that stuff that happens in schools that affects negatively on the children hasn't yet been brought to light or researched enough. And I wonder how we as a community can all participate in research, or maybe have ideas of what needs to be brought to light and looked into, both about the goodness of home education, the negative side of school. I guess if there was scientific approval of certain goodness in home ed, and also if we had even the words to say what we mean. I really like the first session I attended. I forgot the name of the speaker, but it's so hard for home educators to define themselves in words that are not school words. But maybe we can sort of unite in participating towards research and also prompting research.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm just looking at the HE Bike website. On there, there's a research area, but there's also, I'm just looking for it, there's also now a library with an open call for people to share papers on it. I'm just waiting for it to load. And yeah, if people have got stuff they want to share on there, I'm sure it can be shared. Let's just share that screen. Should be there. No, the trouble with this is I need to pull it up on mine so I can show it to you. Oh, here we go. Zoom is in my way as ever. Pull it to the front. Oh, too much. You should
be able to slide everybody over. I don't know. I think Louise had issues sliding the chat windows to the side.
Yeah, that's right. Now, here you are. This is the HE Bike library. And it says down there, if others want to put information on, please get in touch. So that is one place where things can be. I'm going to stop sharing screen because it's slowing my machine down. But things like that. There is a way to do it, but I also think we need not just research coming in because somebody's got to go through it, but we need to have some type of loose affiliation, but a sharing of ideas and understanding, as well as tactics. Because tactics, if people understanding of what the issues are matures, then their response and what they can inspire their circle of influence. So Louise, for example, will have the people within not fine school that she can then feed information down, but it needs to be coming from Louise. It doesn't need to be my voice speaking through Louise. It needs to be what Louise has taken for herself, made her own, and then is passing on to others. So that's just my general feeling. I've just had some messages coming in. Anybody got any feedback on that? Dora Vickers, do you want to comment on what you just posted?
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Right.
Yeah. A few years back, we had an HE visit, and prior to this time, the first time we had it, it was when we rejected the school school slot that we were given. And the next thing we wrote to the school to inform them we're not taking that. And we thanked them for the opportunity, because when we applied, we didn't know about home education. So that was another story. But the HE sent the inspector after us. It was just one morning, and the bell went, and then this guy was standing at the door saying it's been sent by the council to come, and they received a correspondence that we're not taking the school space, and they wanted to know what we're doing with the children. So I didn't know much about HE. I didn't know what my rights were either. So I stood there trying to think on my feet and thinking, yeah, we told the school we're home educating, and what happened? Why are they sending this person after us? But then some part of me said, well, I'm not roasting the children. They can come inside and see for themselves. So I let him in, and he saw what we were doing. And for a few years, it did come twice a year after that. And then about 3 years ago, we moved to another address, and then he came to see us. He would ask to see what the children are doing, and then he would speak with the children. And on one particular occasion, he did ask a few questions, which I answered him. And by the time he wrote the report, what he usually would do then would to write a report, send us a copy, and then the LAE would have theirs. So in this last report we received from him, the report where he was addressing issues that we never discussed, I was alarmed. I didn't know who to talk to. I was like, these are not the issues that we discussed. And if you have noticed this issue when you came, why didn't you raise the questions? I would have been in a position to answer you or explain why we do or why we didn't do, or what provision we have in place for these things. But those issues were not raised at all. And he went to the council, the report he gave them was not what we discussed at all. So after my husband and I talked together, he advised to write to him and tell him, you know, what our issue with the reports were. The issue he was reporting to the LAE about were never discussed. And that if he had had any issue, we should have known. So we did that, and then he came back to write a new report about what we have done. But what happened the following year when he came visiting was that he had to apologize to me privately, that he was sorry about what happened last year, that they had an officer who was education officer at the council at that time, who had the agenda of pushing, or who told them that they had to go and convince parents to go with national curriculum. And so the report they were giving was based on that we were not the only family who responded to the LAE on that issue. But in hindsight, I think maybe what we should have done further as a family was to take that on and respond to the LAE based on that, but we didn't. you know, sometimes as parents, we don't know where our rights starts or ends, or where our responsibility are. I don't know whether anybody has had issue along similar line or something bordering on it, but that was the issue we had. I had a copy of the letter that we sent to them to tell them of our grievances about the report that was done. But, you know, having listened to our talk this afternoon, I think in hindsight, we should have followed that on again so that we could have a record, and it could be also on the record of the council, the proceeding of how these education officers have been made to traumatize people, have been made to file false reports about situations that were simply not there. So I don't know whether there is an issue like that, or maybe things like this could come on the file and help our cause in future.
Can I come in then, please?
Yeah.
I think that area is one of the strengths of where groups like Education Otherwise can work and is able to help. They are very good on that type of area. If there's anybody here from Scotland, you're probably aware of the Scottish Home Educators Forum recent report. The name's just not coming. Home Truth, which actually documents the atmosphere, the agenda, the negative approach of a lot of local authority staff. And that, sadly for them, they released it on the 9th of March, and everything COVID-wide started locking down within a few days. I don't think it'll be lost. They are still lobbying on that front. If you watch my session or not, I have a link to it in the document I've put on the session files that's got all the links to what I referred to there. If you go in there and look under Scotland, you'll find the link to it. There's two versions of it. There's a summary, which gives you a thing, and they actually talk about a postcode lottery and also a staff lottery, even in the same local authority. If you get one member of staff, you can have a much more positive experience than you get if you get a different member of staff. The whole thing, actually, not just in Scotland, but that report reveals it really well. The longer document, I've not got all my way through at all, but that has got some case studies in it. So that will be the type of thing. And ideally, if anybody around with the time, I'm looking at all the volunteers disappearing, but if there was anybody around with the time to do that type of research in this country and duplicate that here and to duplicate it in Wales, I'm not so sure whether the numbers on the Isle of Man would merit it, but certainly to do that in each of the countries would be a really valuable exercise, and then to keep it up to date. And actually, and there is a need to put pressure on governments to discipline local authorities to act within the law. We had a issue here in Shropshire where they were using something I couldn't actually find. It was only on the website as draft. I could never find when it'd been actually adopted from years ago, a policy that was full of problems, but it was written by a member of staff who was very negative towards home education. And in the end, we spoke to our local councillor. She put us in touch with the two most relevant councillors. We met with them and the lead of their lead officer on the issue, and it took ages, and it wasn't a constructive discussion, but in the end, they changed their policy in time for it to be in place, and I don't think they've revised it since the new guidelines came out, but it was much better. So there is a need for governments to do it, but I think there are records. I think in Lancaster for a while, in Lancashire for a while, they had a very good relationship with the local authority, but when staff changed, things changed. So it's not a once and for all battle, it's a continuing need, because my experience is that I get the impression that most local authority staff have an impression of the law rather than a knowledge of the law. Does that communicate that differential? A knowledge of, a impression of the law rather than a knowledge of the law.
Okay, Randall, I think we're going to maybe just wrap it up there, if that's all right.
I think I need to. My voice is getting a bit weary.
Yes, and we also need to let these people grab some lunch before we get back in again. What I think, would you like me to save the chat?
Save it. Maybe not publish it in case we need to just go back and look at something.
I can send you the transcript later. So we're going to finish that right there. But thank you for everyone's really great engagement, and it's been very enlightening. Randall will be back on tonight at 7 p.m. with the same kind of thing. So if you've got more you want to discuss, pop back in there, and I know they are available. You know, if you want to contact them, they would happily hear from you, as would many others that are in this meeting. So I think we need to continue this conversation, and we need to figure out how. So I will have a little think and maybe send something out later.
First step, Juliet, those who, like Louise and Liz, who are involved in groups, if they want to drop me a note on the app, we'll begin talking there, then move it to some other space.
Yeah, we need to have some round table discussions, I think. So so that's something we can talk about. So thank you everybody for participating, and I am going to end the meeting there. See you later.
Yeah. Okay. See some of you tonight, I hope. Bye.